occurred in Maureen. She had told me just before lunch that she would be leaving and wouldn't be, she has to drive back to Michigan and wouldn't be attending the afternoon session. But then just as I was walking up the hill, she came driving in and she told me that she forgot her jacket here, and so she decided to come back and stay for the afternoon sessions. So this was an unprompted wholesome chitta. Then as I was walking up the plank here, I came across Jane, who was carrying her meditation cushion and books, and she said, "I want to say goodbye, Bhante." I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm leaving now." And I said, "Why leave? There's just 2 more sessions and then you complete the course." Then she paused, then she turned around and came back. So that is a prompted wholesome chitta. Okay, and then somehow this morning I was thinking that there's only 1 session this afternoon. That's why I spoke about making a quick tour around the combinations of chittas. But then when I got back to my room, I looked at the schedule and I saw that there's 2 sessions in the afternoon. So we can go through the combinations without rushing through them. Okay, so let us now go back to our textbook. And this is page 100 in the compendium. And this is the section called Combinations of Mental Factors. And this, as I showed on the diagram on the board, this section shows how specific chittas comprise a multiplicity of mental factors. The method of association that we did this morning shows how particular mental factors enter into a multiplicity, of chittas, states of consciousness. The method of combination shows how particular chittas, states of consciousness, include a multiplicity of mental factors. Okay, the introductory verse we could skip over because it just gives a numerical, foreshadowing of what's to come. But we can go, okay, let's go through it anyway. Okay, so in the supramundane states of consciousness, there are 36 factors. In the sublime means fine material and immaterial, there are 35. And in the sense sphere beautiful, there are 38. In the unwholesome, there are 27. In the rootless, there are 12. Thus, there are, by way of combination, 5 ways of grouping cetasikas into chittas. Okay, so now we come to the explication of this, and it starts with the supramundane or world transcending consciousness. And so it's going to treat these according to the scheme of the, generally according to the scheme of the according to the scheme by which the supramundane consciousness is divided according to the level of the jhanas. Okay, so we have in the 8 types of supramundane first jhana consciousness, 36 factors enter into combination. Okay, so these are the 13 ethically variable states. So all of the ethically variable states. So the 7 universals and all 6 of the occasionals applied initial application, sustained application, desire, energy, decision, and zest, what's called zest or rapture. So those are the 13 ethically variables and 23 beautiful mental factors. That means all of the beautiful mental factors except for the two illimitables, the two boundless states of compassion and altruistic joy. Because those compassion and altruistic joy enter only into the sense sphere beautifuls and the fine material sphere, beautiful citas. But the supramundane citas take nibbana as their object, while qualities like compassion and altruistic joy take living beings as their object. And so we don't get compassion and altruistic joy in the paths and fruition states. But some people say that, oh, that means that the arhat doesn't have compassion or altruistic joy. Not true at all. It's only the world transcending experiences where one is realizing nibbana. On those occasions, there's not compassion or altruistic joy actively involved. But when the arhat or any of the noble ones comes out of the path and fruit, then they will develop compassion and altruistic joy, as well as loving kindness and equanimity or impartiality towards beings. Okay, similarly, in the supramundane second jhana, that's the 4 paths and 4 fruits occurring at the level of the second jhana, all of the above are included except vitakka, initial application. That is because at the second level of the second jhana, vitakka drops away. So there is vichara or sustained application, but no initial application. Okay, then when one moves on to the paths and fruits occurring at the level of the third jhana, then all of the above are present except for initial application and sustained application, because both vitakka and vichara drop away. So therefore we get 34 mental factors present. Then in the paths and fruits occurring at the level of the fourth jhana, all of these are included except initial application, sustained application, and piti, rapture or joy. So we get 33 mental factors are included. Then in the fifth, the paths and fruits occurring at the level of the fifth jhana, all of these factors are included except that the feeling changes. So in the fourth jhanic states of consciousness, one has pleasant feeling or sukha, but in the fifth jhanic paths and fruits, pleasant feeling is replaced by neutral feeling, what's here called equanimity. This is equanimous feeling. And so we still have 33 mental factors, except the only difference is one feeling is replaced by another. And so altogether for the 8 types of supramundane consciousness, the combination, there are 5 types of combination by way of the 5 jhanas. Excuse me? You have 234. Wow. May I see your book? Because I think this is the Sri Lankan edition. Oh. Yeah, that's an error. Yeah. Mine doesn't have that. Mine is correct. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Cross out that 2. That's a mistake. It's the chart. The chart on the right. Yeah. Okay, so now we move over to what is called sublime consciousness, the elevated consciousness. This designation combines the fine material sphere and the immaterial sphere, citas, both or all, whether wholesome, resultant, or functional, beautiful functional. Okay, so in the sublime types of consciousness, first in the 3 types of first jhana consciousness. So what are the 3 types of first jhana consciousness? No, no. We're not on world transcending or paths and fruits anymore. This is the regular fine material sphere, first jhana consciousness. What are the 3 types? Okay, I hear that.
Wholesome, functional, and resultant.
Okay, wholesome, resultant, and functional. So the wholesome is what's developed by an ordinary meditator or even one of the noble disciples at the first 3 levels. The resultant is the result of the wholesome jhana consciousness. And then the functional is the first jhana as practiced by or entered by the arahat. So in this consciousness, there are 35 mental factors. So 13 are ethically variable. Again, that's the 7 universals and all 6 of the occasionals. Then there's 22 beautiful mental factors, excluding the 3 abstinences, excluding right speech, right action, right livelihood. And the reason that these are excluded, in fact, in order to achieve the first jhana, one has to be practicing right action, right speech, right livelihood. But in the jhana itself, those factors are not present because those factors occur on an occasion where one is deliberately refraining or abstaining from some type of wrong speech or wrong action or wrong livelihood. And in the jhana, one isn't thinking about refraining from some unwholesome action, but one is purely absorbed in the object. And so the 3 abstinences are missing or excluded from the jhana consciousness. And then compassion and altruistic joy, karuna and mudita, are included. They can be present if one is doing the meditation on compassion or the meditation on altruistic joy, or they might be absent. For example, if one achieves jhana on mindfulness of breathing or on one of the colored discs, the kasina. And when compassion and altruistic joy are present, one or the other is present, but they're not both present simultaneously. I explained this morning because they occur in different modes with a different situation as their referent. Compassion is directed towards those who are suffering, and it has the mode of empathizing with the suffering of those who are in pain and misfortune. And altruistic joy has the situation as its referent of those who are fortunate, who are successful, who have good qualities, and it occurs in the mode of rejoicing with the fortunate ones. Okay, so here we have 35, potentially 35 qualities present. And then the same qualities will be, all those same qualities or mental factors are present in the second jhana consciousness, except initial application. That is, vitaka drops away in the second jhana, so that's excluded. Therefore, we get 34 mental factors. In the third jhana consciousness, all of these are present except vitaka and vichara. So they exclude, so this consciousness excludes initial application and sustained application, giving us a total of 33. In the fourth jhana consciousness, all of these are present except vitaka, vichara, and piti. That is, initial application, sustained application, and rapture or joy. Now the next statement will seem a bit puzzling. It says, in the 15 types of fifth jhana consciousness, the illimitables are not obtained. But then I have a note for myself. But this is my own note added, but non-hatred is present. That's adosa. And upekkha is present. Upekkha is present as balance of mind. And if the fifth jhana consciousness is directed towards living beings as the fourth immeasurable state, then the upekkha will take the form of impartiality towards beings. But now the question comes up, why are they now speaking about 15 types of fifth jhana consciousness? I thought that there are only 3 types of first jhana: wholesome, resultant, functional. So now why 15 types? The reason is because the 4 immaterial attainments are distinguished in the list of citas because they have different objects. But when you look at the constitution, you look at their constitution in terms of mental factors, they have the same group of mental factors as the fifth jhana of the fine material sphere. So there's no difference in mental factors between the 4 immaterial citas and the fifth jhana citta. They all have exactly the same grouping of mental factors. So looking at them from the standpoint of their constellation of mental factors, we can speak sort of freely of 15 types of fifth jhana consciousness. That will be the fifth jhana wholesome consciousness, the 4 immaterial citas make 5 wholesome fifth jhana citas. Then we take those 5 as resultants, and we take those 5 as functionals. And this way we get 15. And so in this type of consciousness, there are 30 factors. Let's see what's missing. Oh, right. Yeah, of course. Because the two immeasurable states, that is, compassion and altruistic joy, don't occur in the fifth jhana consciousness, even the fifth jhana of the fine material sphere, because it's said that in the jhana consciousness, compassion and altruistic joy are associated with pleasant feeling. And so in the fifth jhanic consciousness, the pleasant feeling is replaced by neutral feeling. And so you don't find either metta as such, compassion or altruistic joy in the fifth jhana consciousness, but in the fifth jhana consciousness of the four immeasurables, one will find impartiality or equanimity towards beings. These are really subtle distinctions. But this is matter that has to be, studied over and over and gradually absorbed and digested. So don't worry if you find it a little confusing at first exposure. I mean, I had to study this over months when I first learned it. I didn't have either the benefit or the disadvantage of an intense, 3 or 4 day Abhidhamma course. But I was nibbling on it in little pieces over a period of months. Okay, so now we come to the sense sphere beautiful citas. Again, these can be wholesome, resultant, or functional citas. Okay, so now the text says, in the sense sphere beautiful types of consciousness, first in the wholesome type, so there's going to be some distinction here. In the first couplet, now what is the first couplet? To refresh our memory, we go back to page 46 in the English version. This is chapter 1, section 13, where we have the listing of the sense sphere wholesome consciousness. So this is consciousness accompanied by joy, associated with knowledge unprompted, and then the consciousness accompanied by joy, associated with knowledge prompted. So in this couplet, 38 mental factors enter into combination, namely the 13 ethically variable mental factors. Again, these are the 7 universals and all 6 of the occasionals, and the 25 beautiful mental factors. Wow, this one gets the gold medal for, I think, maximum number of mental factors. But maybe I was a little too quick to say that, because here the 2 illimitables, or 2 boundless states, and the 3 abstinences should be combined separately. Okay, what this means is that in the sense sphere, this first couplet of sense sphere beautiful consciousness, there may be compassion or altruistic joy, or maybe not. So these kinds of consciousness can occur without compassion and altruistic joy, and they can occur also in combination with compassion and altruistic joy, but not compassion and altruistic joy simultaneously, because as I explained just a few minutes ago, the 2 have refer to different situations and have a different tone, a different flavor. And then the 3 abstinences, again, right speech, right action, right livelihood, may be present, or they might be completely absent. And if they are present, it's one or the other, not all 3. Because if one is thinking to tell a lie, then one refrains from speaking the lie, then right speech is present. Similarly, if one is in a situation where one can backbite and spread false rumors about other people, but one makes an effort to refrain from that, again, right speech is present. Similarly, with regard to the opportunity to speak angry speech or to indulge in frivolous chatter. And then if one is in a situation where one might transgress against right action, right bodily action, but one refrains, then right action is present. And similarly, if one has the opportunity to earn a living or to get, even if it's not working at an occupation, but to get some extra loot in a dishonest way, and one decides to refrain from that, then right livelihood is present. Okay, so in these two, the first two types of wholesome sense sphere consciousness, up to 38 factors could be present. But in the second couplet, all those are included, excluding the mental factor which is called panya, wisdom, or knowledge, jnana, or non-delusion. Because these two states of consciousness are said to be dissociated from knowledge. So, ipso facto, there's no faculty of wisdom, knowledge, or non-delusion when those two types of consciousness arise. Okay, so that's the second couplet. The third couplet is consciousness accompanied by equanimity or neutral feeling associated with knowledge, unprompted, then the same prompted. So in this couplet, all those are included, excluding piti, rapture or delight. So why is piti absent? Right, because you can't have the neutral feeling and delight at the same time. So, piti, delight, or rapture arises only in the consciousness accompanied by a joyful feeling. But when the feeling is neutral, indifferent, then piti, delight, has to be absent. Then the fourth couplet is the consciousness accompanied by equanimity, dissociated from knowledge, unprompted and prompted. So in this kind of consciousness, all those are included, excluding knowledge and delight. So the consciousness is dissociated from knowledge, so wisdom, knowledge, non-delusion has to be absent. And it's accompanied by neutral feeling, and so delight has to be excluded. And so in this way, we get 36 chittas. Okay, then in the functional types of consciousness, this would be basically the same 8 types of consciousness, except as they are occurring in an arahant, when he's at the level of sensory experience. So in the functional types of consciousness, in the same 4 couplets, these mental factors are included in the same 4 ways, except that the 3 abstinences are excluded. That is, right speech, right livelihood are excluded. And the reason they're excluded is because the Arahat has already completed the development of the path, and so he's already eliminated all the defilements that might result in wrong speech, wrong action, wrong livelihood. And so there's no more need for these 3 abstinences. But in fact, in the sutta way of explanation, it's said that the Arahant possesses what are called the 10 factors of the perfected one. And those 10 perfected factors are right speech, right action, right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. Those are the 8 factors of the path, plus right knowledge and right liberation. So in the sutta method, we ascribe all of the 10 right factors to the Arhat. But the Abhidhamma method is looking at these not just in terms of the way they're expressed outwardly, but treating them as mental factors. And so for the Arahat, those 3 mental factors are no longer needed, so they're not included in his citas. Okay, so this takes care of the functional types of consciousness, which therefore have 35, 34, 34, and 33 cetasikas. Okay, and then in the resultant types of consciousness, all of these mental factors are included except the 2 illimitables or 2 boundless states, compassion and altruistic joy, and the 3 abstinences. Because compassion and altruistic joy will occur when one is developing those qualities towards living beings, and that doesn't happen in the resultant consciousness. And even in the resultant consciousness, there is present non-hatred, but the non-hatred doesn't take the form of metta in the resultant consciousness. And the mental quality of mental neutrality or equanimity doesn't take the form of impartiality towards beings, but they're simply bare mental factors. But it seems to me, this is my personal impression, that people who have practiced maybe loving kindness, compassion in previous lives, or even earlier in this life, no, let's take in previous lives, it seems that it leaves some imprint on their mental consciousness. So at a very deep level of the stream of consciousness, maybe the level of the bhavanga, there's still some impression of, say, loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy there. So these are people who naturally feel compassion towards the suffering of others, naturally wish to bring happiness to others, naturally rejoice in the happiness of others. Whereas those people who haven't practiced in that way, if they want to develop these qualities, have to work harder at it to make them habitual dispositions of their mind. Do you want to ask questions at this point? Because this is a pretty heavy section, I have to say. Well, when they can ask the questions, then we don't have to lock the doors. It's when things get... Okay. Maureen, go ahead, Maureen.
Okay. My question is trying to relate so like a sense sphere, let's say a sense sphere wholesome consciousness with its results, with all the accompanying mental factors. So the sense sphere wholesome consciousness, those consciousnesses in the thought process, they arise as jhavana.
Right.
Because they're productive of kama.
Yeah.
And then all the resultant consciousnesses are arising as... When are they arising in the thought process?
Okay, that's the question you're asking.
Well, that's not the whole question. That's one part of the question.
I didn't go into that topic because things get very technical there, and mean, if we had time, do you want to stay through tomorrow morning?
Well, then I'll ask the
Wait,
second.
but
okay.
I'll just make one observation about the resultants. You see, citas have different functions, and one of the most important functions is the bhavanga. That's the underlying stream of consciousness. And the underlying stream of consciousness, or bhavanga, begins with one kind of citta, which is of the same type, but it plays such an important role that it's singled out with a separate name, and it ends with a citta at the very moment of death, which again, the citta is of the same type, but because it plays a unique role, it's given its own name. So we call these three cittas, we call the first citta of the new life, the citta that arises at the very moment of conception. In Pali, it's called the patisandhi citta, which means the rebirth linking consciousness. It's the consciousness that is said to link the stream of consciousness from the old life with the stream that's going to launch out in the new life. So it's the relinking consciousness, or simply the rebirth consciousness. The one consciousness, the one citta that arises at the very moment of conception. Then right after it arises, it's followed by the bhavanga. And the bhavanga is of the same type as in terms of its mental factors, as the rebirth consciousness. Then the bhavanga flows on through the course of life whenever there's no active consciousness, right up to the very moment of death. Then the final consciousness is called the chuti citta, which means the perishing consciousness, or the death consciousness. So these three types of cittas are all of the same constitution, and those are all resultant cittas. So of the various activities that or karmas that we create in the course of our life, one of our karmic cittas is going to take on that role of becoming the rebirth linking consciousness, then that resultant consciousness, or the result. Let me go back. I think I lost the track. Okay, of the various karmic consciousnesses that we create in the course of our life, one of those karmic consciousnesses is going to generate the new form of existence. And that consciousness will arouse, corresponding to itself, a similar consciousness, which becomes the rebirth linking consciousness, and then continues through the course of life as the bhavanga consciousness, and then at the very end signs off as the death consciousness. So that is one of the, or three of the functions of the resultant consciousness: rebirth linking, bhavanga, and death. But then you had your question. Yes, she needs the microphone.
So that consciousness, let's say it's the wholesome consciousness that has been accompanied by these mental factors. So, I mean, maybe to take an example, let's say the wholesome consciousness that's taking the breath as object.
Yeah.
So just to make it clear, and then it has the, whatever, 33 mental factors.
Yeah, whatever.
Okay. Then if that is the consciousness that's going to produce its result as a rebirth consciousness, those particular 33 mental factors are also going to be present in the rebirth consciousness. Those exact same mental
there's
factors.
I'd have to check on that, because some will not be present. But I think if it's doing the mindfulness of breathing, I think they'll all be present.
So,
okay.
Okay. So I guess the question is, so the resultants will carry the same mental factors as what they're resulting from.
Pretty much so, except in the case, as mentioned, one has to go back and review that. Like in the case of the jhana consciousnesses, if one has practiced jhana using compassion or altruistic joy, those are not in the rebirth and bhavanga consciousness, according to the Abhidhamma system.
Okay, so I guess the important question then is, let's say it's a sense sphere consciousness that is, like I'm trying to figure out the prompted, unprompted, and the knowledge dissociated from knowledge. Those resultants, like I'm assuming that if it's a prompted consciousness, then the result, let's say it's a prompted wholesome consciousness, the result is a little less karmically positive than an unprompted, or a consciousness that's associated with knowledge has a more powerful positive result than a consciousness dissociated from knowledge. So as resultants in rebirth, could you describe what that might mean in terms of if your rebirth consciousness is associated with knowledge or dissociated from knowledge because it's the result of it? Do you understand what I'm saying?
It means that a person who has a triple-rooted rebirth consciousness, a consciousness with the factor of knowledge, will have a greater capacity to understand things, a quicker, greater intelligence, and a better ability to progress in meditation, to reach jhanas. And I think it's said to reach the jhanas, the paths, and the fruits, one needs a triple-rooted rebirth consciousness. Without the root of knowledge, I mean, one could practice and maybe make some progress, but one is not able to reach the jhanas, or certainly not the paths and the fruits. Okay, Katie?
In regards to equanimity and jhanas of equanimity, those are always placed in a wholesome arena and they have a wholesome feel to them, and yet they're defined as equanimity. Is there a reason?
Wait, say again?
So equanimity is obviously a wholesome state, and it has a benevolent feel. But if it's, I'm just curious what maybe a technician's point of view is. How can something that is called equanimity also be benevolent? Because those two seem to come hand in hand. It seems like a benevolent state. It's clearly defined benevolently in the suttas in here. And I'm wondering if they have a reason for why. It's just maybe even a slightly formal question. How do they justify equanimity being beneficial or benevolent?
I'm not sure, because we haven't mentioned benevolence, and I'm not sure what you're identifying with.
So wholesome then, using the word wholesome instead of benevolent.
And the equanimity you're speaking about?
Yes, equanimity always finds itself in a wholesome list, and then to feel or to enter an equanimous state is also to feel is a wholesome arena. And I'm wondering how equanimity doesn't find itself outside of either list, as from a technical point of view, from an academic point, from these guys. Because equanimity would mean neither bad nor good, no feeling, and...
Okay, there's equanimity as feeling, which is, to make things simple, call that neutral feeling.
Okay.
Neutral feeling can be either wholesome, unwholesome. Mm-hmm. Now there's equanimity as an elevated mental attitude, balance of mind.
Mm-hmm.
So now what is, using that distinction, what is the question?
It regards the mundane jhana of equanimity, and though it is gradientless or without feeling, it is still a wholesome state. That's okay. And I'm wondering how they position it into wholesomeness, even though it clearly is. But okay.
I'm just not catching the question. Okay, I want to go on now to finish this section. Okay, then we just look at the bottom of page 105. There's a section 25, distinctions among the beautiful types. I think this just says sums up what I always said, that the abstinences are not found in the functional consciousness or the sublime consciousness, that's fine material or immaterial sphere. And the illimitables are not found, that's the boundless states, not found in the supramundane, nor is the pair, that's the boundless states and the abstinences, present in sense sphere resultants. Then in the supreme, that's the supramundanes, the jhana factors are the basis of distinction. In the middle, that's the fine material, immaterial. The illimitables, the boundless states, are the distinction, and the jhana factors. And in the limited, the sense sphere beautiful, the abstinences, knowledge, and zest or delight are the basis of distinctions. Okay, let's go to the unwholesome consciousness. So here, this is the akusala citta. This is always sense sphere, always, always unwholesome. So in the unwholesome types of consciousness, first in those rooted in greed, and here we can go to page 32, and for those using the Chinese, this is chapter 1, section 4. So in the unwholesome types of consciousness, first in those rooted in greed, we have the first unprompted consciousness. 19 states enter into combination, namely the 13 ethically variable factors, the 4 universal unwholesome mental factors, that is my mind is getting a I have to look at that. Delusion, shamelessness, fearlessness of wrongdoing, and restlessness. So those are the 4 universal unwholesome mental factors. Those make 17, and then greed has to be there because this is a citta rooted in greed, and wrong view is present because this is a consciousness associated with wrong view. Okay, in the second unprompted consciousness, this is the unwholesome, rooted in greed. We start out on page 32 and it continues to page 33. So this is the citta accompanied by joy, dissociated from wrong view, unprompted. So in the second unprompted consciousness, the same 17 are found, that is, the 13 ethically variables, the 4 universal unwholesome factors. Those 17 are found together with greed, and now wrong view will not occur on those occasions, but conceit may occur. It may be present, it may not be present. This qualification will be made later. So, as we said earlier, conceit and wrong view don't arise simultaneously. It's either one or the other, but wrong view will always arise in the cittas described as associated with wrong view, whereas conceit will arise from time to time in the cittas rooted in greed, dissociated from wrong view. Okay, in the third unprompted consciousness, this is the consciousness accompanied by neutral feeling, associated with wrong view. There are 18 factors. That is, we have the 17, that's the 13 universals, the 4 unwholesome universals, 17, to wait. Oh, I see, because in the first unprompted there are 19. Okay. In the second unprompted there are also 19, except greed and occasionally conceit. If there's no conceit, then there's 18. Okay, in the third unprompted, again, that's accompanied by neutral feeling associated with wrong view, there are 18. That is the 13. Oh, I see why. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Zest, delight, joy, that's the one that's present. So there are 16 ethically variables. I have to say the text should have been clearer about that. Okay, there are 18 states. So we have 7 universals, and now not 6, but 5 of the occasionals, because zest or delight drops out. Of course, it mentions at the very end, it does mention that. So we have greed and wrong view, but zest or delight is gone, so that gives us 18. And then in the fourth unprompted, this is consciousness accompanied by neutral feeling, dissociated from wrong view. We have 18, that is the 16 ethically variables. Then we have, so that makes 16, then greed, and then conceit may be present, may be absent. So taking the maximum, we have 18. In the fifth unprompted, this is the unprompted associated with aversion or hatred. There are 20 factors that enter into combination. So we have 12 of the ethically variables, the 7 universals, and 5 excluding zest or delight from the occasionals, but now including 4 from the hatred quartet. That is, hatred has to be present in that consciousness, and there may be present envy, avarice, and worry or remorse. So it says here, envy, avarice or miserliness, and remorse should be combined separately. That is, one or the other may be present, or all 3 may be absent. Okay. Then thankfully for the prompted types of consciousness, it says the above states should similarly be combined with only this difference, that sloth and torpor, otherwise I call dullness and drowsiness, are included, because this kind of consciousness has to be prompted, and so of its own it has sloth and torpor, so it needs prompting. That raises the interesting question, why in the wholesome states of consciousness which are prompted, it would seem that there should also be some dullness and drowsiness because they have to be prompted. But just as my Chinese teacher says, that's the way they say it in Chinese. So we say, that's the way the Abhidhamma masters made up the system. Okay, then we come to the type of consciousness connected with restlessness. And so in this type of consciousness, 15 mental factors are present. we have 11 ethically variable factors. So we have 7 universal, and we have 4 excluding desire and zest or delight. Somehow, for some reason, restlessness excludes desire, and it's accompanied by neutral feeling, and so zest or delight won't be present. Excuse me? It's one of the delusion consciousnesses. Yeah. I think it's number 11. Okay, so we have 11 ethically variable states. So the 2 that we exclude are desire and zest. And then we add in the 4 universal unwholesome factors. So that makes 15. So of the ethically variables in the restless state, we have applied thought, or initial application, sustained application, decision, and energy. But we're excluding desire and delight. Then in the consciousness connected with doubt, we have again 15 states included. So this excludes, it includes doubt, so we have one more factor added, and it excludes desire and it excludes decision. So we have 10 ethically variables, the 7 universals, initial application, sustained application, and energy, but we exclude delight, desire, and decision, and we include doubt. Okay, so that takes care of the unwholesome consciousness, and now we are coming into the real home stretch with the most challenging group of all, the rootless consciousness. Okay, so in the rootless types of consciousness, first, the smile-producing consciousness of the arhat. So this is that strange consciousness which causes an arhat to smile about subtle phenomena, is said. So we have only the 12 ethically variable states. So we have the 7 universals and 5 occasionals excluding desire. Again, I don't know why quite desire is excluded, but that's the way they say, that's the way they put it. Okay, then in the determining consciousness, that's the consciousness that occurs just before the jhavana stage, where one determines the nature of the object. So one has 11 excluding desire and zest. And this one includes energy, but excludes desire and delight. It has to exclude delight because it's accompanied by equanimity. The investigating consciousness accompanied by joy includes 11 states. That is, all of these except desire and energy. It's a little strange that it excludes energy, but it has, because it's accompanied by joy, so it has zest or delight. Okay, the triple mind element, this is shorthand for the 5 sense-door adverting consciousness. That's the consciousness that looks to see which of the 5 doors is being knocked on. And the two types of receiving consciousness, and the pair of rootless rebirth linking types of consciousness. Those are the two types of investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity, which also, this is a tricky point, which also perform the function of the rebirth bhavanga consciousness for certain beings. These types of consciousness have 10 factors, that is, the 7 universals and 3 of the occasionals: initial application, sustained application, and decision. But they lack desire, delight, and energy. And then the 2 types of 5-fold sense consciousness, that's the wholesome and resultant and unwholesome resultant occurring at the 5 sense doors. Those types of consciousness, they're the weakest of all. They have only 7 mental factors, the 7 universals. And so the verses just give the summary, and we'll take a break. Maybe a 10-minute break. Is that too short?